The night was supposed to be just another routine shift for Officer Jake Carter. He had spent years patrolling these streets, keeping the peace, and making sure the law was upheld. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. It started with a simple traffic stop, something he had done 1,000 times before. But as he approached the driver's side window, his heart nearly stopped. Sitting behind the wheel wasn't just any driver. It was the man who had shaped his entire career, the very person who had trained him, mentored him, and told him everything he knew about being a cop. Officer Carter blinked, trying to process the situation. His former mentor, Sergeant Daniel Reeves, sat there with a look that was hard to read. Was it shock, guilt, amusement? Jake wasn't sure. But what he did know was that something felt off. Sergeant Reeves had retired a few years ago, leaving behind a respected legacy in the force. So what was he doing out here in the middle of the night, and why did he look so uneasy? Trying to shake off the confusion, Carter cleared his throat. Sergeant Reeves? His voice was steady, but his mind raced with questions. Reeves let out a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Hey, Jake. Looks like you got me." His words were calm, but there was something in his tone that didn't sit right. Carter glanced at the vehicle. No obvious violations, nothing suspicious, so why had Reeves looked so hesitant to roll down his window? Then, something caught Carter's eye. A small detail, almost insignificant to anyone else, but to a trained officer, it stood out like a flashing neon sign. His instincts kicked in. This wasn't just a random stop. Something was wrong. But what? Carter's grip tightened around his flashlight. He had a choice to make: proceed as he would with any other stop, or let his personal connection cloud his judgment. His training told him to follow protocol, but his gut told him that this situation was anything but normal. What happened next would change everything. In just a matter of seconds, the night took a turn that neither of them saw coming. Officer Carter would soon realize that sometimes the people we trust the most can surprise us in ways we never imagined. And as the tension between mentor and student reached a breaking point, one thing became clear: this was no ordinary traffic stop. Stay tuned, because what happened next was truly unbelievable. Carter's pulse quickened as he took a small step back, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. He had always respected Sergeant Reeves, looked up to him even. The man had been a guiding force during his early years in the academy, drilling into him the importance of integrity, discipline, and trust. And yet, in this moment, trust felt like the last thing he could rely on. "License and registration, please," Carter finally said, keeping his voice steady. He wasn't sure why he even asked. He knew exactly who Reeves was. But something about following protocol made this moment feel a little less personal, a little easier to handle. Reeves exhaled sharply before reaching into the glove compartment, moving slower than expected, almost hesitant. Carter kept his flashlight trained on Reeves' hands, his instincts warning him not to drop his guard. The tension between them was thick, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. As Reeves handed over his license and registration, Carter took them without breaking eye contact. "Where are you headed tonight, Sergeant?" he asked, careful not to sound accusatory. He needed to keep things neutral, professional. Reeves hesitated for just a fraction of a second, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Carter did. Years on the force had trained him to pick up on the smallest details, the tiny cracks in a story that hinted at something deeper beneath the surface. "Just out for a drive," Reeves finally said, clearing my head. Carter frowned. It wasn't that the answer was suspicious on its own. Plenty of people drove at night to think. But something about the way Reeves said it didn't sit right. There was an edge to his voice, a tightness in his jaw, like he was holding something back. His eyes flickered toward the passenger seat, where a small duffel bag rested. Nothing about it seemed out of place, but something gnawed at Carter's gut. He had learned to trust that feeling over the years. It had saved his life more than once. "Mind if I ask what's in the bag?" Carter asked, keeping his tone casual. Reeves' expression didn't change, but Carter saw the way his fingers curled slightly around the steering wheel, his knuckles turning just a shade whiter. "Just some personal stuff," Reeves replied. "Nothing to worry about." But Carter was worried, and as much as he wanted to believe his old mentor, something told him that this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, Reeves wasn't telling him the whole truth. Carter took a deep breath, bracing himself for what came next, because no matter how much he wished otherwise, he knew one thing for certain: this night was far from over. Carter's fingers grazed the edge of his holster, not as a threat, but as a precaution. He hated that it had come to this. This was Sergeant Reeves, the man who once told him that being a cop wasn't just about enforcing the law, but about understanding people. And yet, here they were, caught in a moment that neither of them could fully explain. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle for a second, Sergeant?" Carter asked, keeping his voice even. It wasn't a demand, yet. Reeves sighed, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel in an almost nervous rhythm. For a moment, Carter thought he might refuse. But then, with a slow nod, Reeves pushed open the door and stepped out onto the pavement. The street was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic a few blocks away. Streetlights cast long shadows, stretching across the pavement like something out of a crime scene photo. Carter glanced down at the duffel bag still sitting in the passenger seat. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to open that up for me?" He kept his tone light, but the weight of the question lingered between them. Reeves didn't move right away. Instead, he just stood there, staring at Carter like he was trying to figure something out. Then finally, he spoke. "Jake, you really want to do this?" The way he said it sent a chill through Carter. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was something else, something more complicated. "I just want to know what's going on," Carter replied, his grip tightening slightly. "If there's nothing to worry about, then let's clear it up and move on." Reeves let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head as he rubbed a hand over his face. "You always were by the book," he muttered. "Guess I taught you too well." Carter swallowed, his stomach twisting. "Then let's follow the book, Sergeant. Open the bag." Reeves finally moved, but not toward the duffel. Instead, he took a step closer to Carter, lowering his voice. "Listen to me, Jake. Whatever you think this is, it's bigger than that. You don't want to be involved." Carter's jaw tightened. "I'm already involved." Reeves studied him, then let out a slow breath. "All right," he said, turning back toward the car. But instead of grabbing the bag, he did something that sent Carter's instincts screaming. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Hands where I can see them," Carter barked, his pulse spiking. Reeves froze, his hands stopping mid-motion. "Easy," he said, his voice calm, measured. "I'm not doing anything stupid." But Carter wasn't so sure anymore, because in that moment he realized something that made his blood run cold. The man standing in front of him wasn't just his mentor. He was a suspect, and the worst part, Carter had no idea what crime had been committed or how deep it really went. Carter's heart pounded as his hand hovered near his holster. His mind screamed at him to stay in control, to not let emotions cloud his judgment, but this was uncharted territory. Reeves wasn't just another person he had pulled over. He was the man who had once been like a second father to him. But now, every instinct told him something was very, very wrong. "Slowly," Carter ordered, his voice firm. "Take your hand out of your jacket. Empty." Reeves didn't move right away. His eyes locked onto Carter's, searching, as if hoping to find a way out of this without making things worse. But it was too late for that. The tension between them was a wire stretched so tight that one wrong move could snap it in an instant. Finally, Reeves exhaled and pulled his hand out. No weapon, just a folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled at the edges. He held it up for Carter to see. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. Carter didn't lower his guard. "Then tell me what it is." Reeves hesitated before extending the paper toward him. Carter took it cautiously, his eyes flicking toward the duffel bag still sitting in the car. Every nerve in his body told him that whatever was inside that bag was the real problem. But first, he unfolded the paper. The words were handwritten, hurried. Some of them were smudged, as if the writer had been in too much of a rush to let the ink dry. Carter scanned the page, his eyes catching on certain phrases that sent chills down his spine. Asterisk, asterisk, we don't have much time. Asterisk, 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 the evidence is in danger. Asterisk, 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 you can't trust them. Asterisk, asterisk. Carter looked up sharply. What is this? Reeves ran a hand through his graying hair, glancing down the street as if expecting someone to appear out of the darkness. I didn't know who else to go to, he said, his voice lower now. I thought I had more time, but they're closing in. If I don't disappear tonight, I won't get another chance. Carter felt his stomach drop. Disappear. He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Who's after you, Sergeant? Reeves clenched his jaw, hesitating. People who don't want the truth coming out, he said finally. People with power. Carter's grip tightened around the paper. The words blurred for a moment as his mind raced. He wanted to believe Reeves, but doubt clawed at him. Was he really in danger? Or was this just a desperate excuse to cover up something worse? Before Carter could press further, a sudden noise shattered the silence. A car approaching fast. Headlights swept across them, tires screeching as the vehicle slowed down just a block away. Reeves stiffened, its thumb. Carter turned, his pulse spiking as the car idled in the distance, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. He felt the weight of his badge, the responsibility of his oath. He had spent years enforcing the law, following the rules. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure which side of this situation was right. Then, without warning, Reeves moved. In a split second, he grabbed the duffel bag from the car, his expression full of urgency. I need you to trust me, Jake. His voice was raw, desperate. But if you can't, then stop me. Carter's breath caught as he realized what was happening. He had a choice. A split-second decision that would change everything. And in the next moment, the car down the street began to move. Fast. Carter barely had time to react before the car down the street surged forward, its tires screeching against the pavement. His instincts screamed at him to take control, to get Reeves on the ground and demand answers. But there was no time. Reeves clutched the duffel bag tighter and took a step back, his eyes darting between Carter and the rapidly approaching vehicle. Jake, listen to me, Reeves said, his voice urgent but steady. If you stop me now, everything I've worked for, everything I tried to protect, will be gone. Carter's fingers flexed near his holster, his mind at war with itself. Every fiber of his training told him that letting Reeves go was the wrong move. But the look in his mentor's eyes, the desperation, the sheer weight of whatever secret he was carrying, made Carter hesitate. The car was almost on them now. Its headlights cut through the night, illuminating them in a cold, unforgiving glare. At the last second, the vehicle skidded to a stop just a few yards away. The doors didn't open. The engine idled, low and menacing. Carter swallowed hard. Who are they? He demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Reeves exhaled sharply, glancing at the car before looking back at Carter. People who don't leave loose ends, he said. And right now, that includes both of us. Before Carter could process that, the back window of the car rolled down just an inch. A gloved hand appeared, holding something small, a phone. A second later, Carter's own phone vibrated in his pocket. He hesitated, then pulled it out. Unknown number. His pulse pounded in his ears as he accepted the call and lifted it to his ear. Who is this? A voice smooth and calm answered. Officer Carter, you have no idea what you stepped into, but you do have a choice. Carter's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of choice? The voice remained eerily composed. You can walk away. Right now. Let Sergeant Reeves go. Forget this night ever happened, and everything will be fine. Or There was a pause just long enough for Carter's stomach to tighten. You can do your duty, but if you do, understand that you won't like what comes next. Carter's throat went dry. This wasn't a simple traffic stop gone wrong. This was something bigger, something deeper than he had ever imagined. His entire career had been built on the belief that justice was clear-cut, that right and wrong weren't blurred lines. But now, standing between a man he once trusted and an unseen force threatening him from the shadows, that belief was slipping through his fingers. Reeves took another step back, gripping the duffel bag like it held the last piece of a puzzle Carter couldn't see. "Jake, if you trust me, if you ever did, you'll let me go." Carter's jaw clenched. The car engine revved slightly, a not-so-subtle warning. The phone in his hand was silent now, the weight of the last words still heavy in the air. He had seconds to decide, seconds to determine whether to uphold the law or trust a man who was running from it. And as the night stretched on, Carter realized that no matter what choice he made, there was no turning back. Carter's breath was shallow, his mind racing. The weight of his badge felt heavier than ever. He could feel the eyes on him, Reeves watching, the unseen figures inside the car waiting. His decision would change everything. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, in a flash, Reeves moved. He bolted. Carter reacted instantly, his instincts taking over. "Stop," he shouted, lunging forward. But Reeves was fast, even at his age, weaving between parked cars toward a narrow alley. The car's engine roared. The back door flew open, and a man in dark clothing stepped out, his movements sharp and practiced. Carter barely had time to process before the man pulled something from his coat, a gun. Everything slowed. Carter drew his own weapon, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. "Drop it," he commanded, but the man didn't. Instead, he aimed, not at Carter, but at Reeves. Carter didn't think, he fired. The shot cracked through the night, echoing off the buildings. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder as he dropped his weapon. The car's tires screeched as it accelerated, disappearing into the darkness. The wounded man, realizing he was alone, stumbled backward, then turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of streets. Carter exhaled sharply, his hands shaking. Then he remembered Reeves. He sprinted into the alley, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Reeves," he called. Silence. Then a low groan. Carter rushed forward and found Reeves slumped against a brick wall, gripping his side. His face was pale, but he was conscious. And the duffel bag, it was still there, clutched in his arms like a lifeline. Carter dropped to one knee. "You hit." Reeves shook his head. "Not me," he rasped. "But he just made enemies you don't even know exist." Carter swallowed hard. "What's in the bag, Reeves?" Reeves hesitated, then slowly unzipped it. Inside, stacks of files, flash drives, and what looked like surveillance photos. Carter picked up one, his stomach twisting as he recognized a face, a high-ranking city official, and another, and another. These weren't just random names. These were people in power. People who, according to these documents, had their hands in something far bigger than Carter had imagined. "This is why they want you gone," Carter muttered. Reeves nodded weakly. "And now they'll come for you too." Carter clenched his jaw, his mind reeling. He had done what was right, protected his mentor, stopped a hit. But in doing so, he had stepped into something much bigger than he could have ever anticipated. And as the sirens finally rang out in the distance, growing closer, Carter realized the real fight hadn't even begun. Carter could hear the sirens growing louder, but his focus remained on Reeves. The older man was struggling to stay upright, his breath labored. Carter knew they didn't have much time before officers flooded the scene, asking questions neither of them were ready to answer. Reeves met his gaze. "You've got a choice, Jake," he said, his voice strained. "You can hand this over, let them bury it, or..." He didn't have to finish. Carter already knew. If he held onto this evidence, if he chose to pursue the truth, it would put a target on his back. Carter's mind, flashed back to the night he first joined the force, when Reese had told him that